Hammer down. Hammer down.
You're on. Drop the hammer. Okay, being 6:30, calling the meeting to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Barnes?
Here?
Mrs. Rogers?
Here.
That's not good. Mr. Roach?
Here.
Mrs. Barney?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Ms. Durig?
Here.
Mr. Lennon?
Here.
Mr. Gannon?
Here.
Okay, thank you. We're going to turn this meeting over to our solicitor, Patrick Gannon, to act as temporary chairperson as we do the restructuring for 2025.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to hear calls for nominations for chairperson of the authority.
I nominate Aaron Barnes.
I'll second that.
Hearing none others, can we get a roll call vote on that?
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney? Mr. Smith?
Aye. Nomination passes unanimously. I'd now like to turn the meeting back over to the newly appointed chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Gannon. I would like to make a motion to appoint Roseanne Rogers as vice chair.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Do I hear a motion to elect the secretary treasurer, a nominee?
I nominate Craig Roach.
I'll second. Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Okay, I would like to nominate for assistant secretary treasurer Brad Smith. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
I'd like to make a motion to designate Gatens, Tuccieri, and Nicholas PC as our solicitor for the authority for 2025. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye. Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to designate Lennon Smith Solar Engineering, Inc. as our consulting engineer for the authority for 2025. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye. Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to designate Mark C. Turnley, CPA, as our the auditor for the authority for 2025. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
I'd like to make a motion to designate CFS Bank as the depository for the authority for 2025. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. That concludes our restructuring or reorganization for 2025. Do I hear a motion to approve the December 17th, 2024 minutes?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is 66 Clifford Road Sewer Service. Can we have some information on that?
Good evening. Jim Ventura here with PVE. I'm here with Gary Schmidt. He's the owner of the property at 66 Clifford Road. we've been sort of on and off again, I think, with Michael, probably for the past couple years, looking at sort of this area and what we can do. And I don't know, do they have any information on?
Yes,
what
I
Yeah,
provided
we
them
sent-
with
we
the
sent sort of
packet.
a couple exhibits sort of back and forth and a proposal, but essentially what we're looking to do is, on Clifford Road right now, there is no public sanitary sewer service. With all the development, obviously, that's been taking place in Cecil, installation and development, you guys are working towards, improving areas, installing sanitary where needed. There was a development just above this site, which I believe is King Charles.
Windsor Woods is the development.
Yeah, and that was Sir James and King Charles Court, I think. So on that cul-de-sac, there was sanitary, put in to service the new residential land development. And that sanitary manhole's in the cul-de-sac, which I think is maybe 150 feet above where the existing, the Schmidt house would be down on Clifford Road. Right now, looking at the location of that manhole to Gary's property line, it's about 200 feet. And to the physical structure, it's about 350 feet. I haven't had a chance sort of to look through your rules and regulations. I know DEP is anywhere from, 150 to 350 mandatory tap-in. But I think, looking at this, we're right about where I think DEP would most likely want you to tap in. At this point, we have from a sanitary standpoint, sort of pumping sort of on a temporary holding tank, and the house is unoccupied at this point. But what we'd like to do is get public sanitary sewer service, installed into the property. So what we're proposing to do is do a grinder, sort of an E1 grinder type system, put it in for the property, and then install a small force main, 1.5-inch force main, up an existing public utility right away to get into that manhole. What I would propose to the board, and Michael recommended sort of that we come tonight and sort of talk about it, was there'd have to be obviously legal to take a look at it and what we can and can't do. But I would propose sort of that Mr. Schmidt go ahead and put the line in, the E1 and then the sort of the small diameter force main to public standards. It would be an 1.5-inch line, have it inspected by the authority, and as long as Gary's the only one on it, have basically an agreement so he would own and maintain that force main essentially as a lateral. But being that it would be 1.5 inches, you would have the ability, there are a handful of homes down here, and the only way for these homes to get public sewer service would be this route, because to the south of here is a railway, and you're not going to be, you can, but it's going to be very cost prohibitive to bore into the road. Then you're going to have to pay an ongoing extortion fee to the rail company for ever to try to put it in. So I think what we would do is we'd like to put it in and then have Gary own and maintain it. And then if somebody else ever ties into that line where you have multiple customers on that line, then at that point it would become public.
Any recommendations? Mike, comments?
My understanding when we first started talking about this back when is the problem is in Cecil, the rules and regulations currently say that you cannot have a private lateral on other property. That was one of the big issues. But we did take a look at it, and it was to be considered. We just needed to get more information. So we do have more information as far as what they planned on doing, a plan there. But I know it would be, everything would fall on the burden of the homeowner. Mr. Schmidt would be responsible for all that. The authority really would not be responsible for anything. So it's ultimately up to what the board would want to consider, because it's in our rules and regulations currently that this is prohibited. So it's something that we can take a look at, and ultimately, if it's a board call.
Yeah, there's an existing public utility easement that we would work within from basically Clifford Road all the way up to the cul-de-sac. So there was when the development was put in, there was a public utility easement installed here. Right now, there is a water line in it, but at the bottom, it's basically, I think, 30 feet wide. there's an existing public water main and an existing electric line. So what we would propose to do is maintain the sanitary force main within that existing public utility easement. And that's where I was going. I understand your rules and regulations as far as being across the private property, but if we installed this force main to public standards within the public easement, and had a private agreement regarding maintenance of this line until such time, because I do think ultimately if this area, if you look at it on a map, ultimately this area is going to need public sewer, period. I mean, that'll happen. And the only way to get public sewer service to this area would be by utilizing this easement to get to this public manhole. I don't see any other way to do it. So ultimately there would be some sort of a common force main going up over there. The best way to sewer this area, and I'd defer to Lynn and Smith to look at it, would obviously be the grinder E1 under a low pressure system. You're not gonna wanna put a separate pump station. There's not enough use out of this area. So I think if we put this small diameter force main in now, it could be used, by the authority in the future for multiple, structures along Clifford Road.
So I want to make sure I understand your desire is to put an 1.5-inch line in, forced main, but if another residence ties into it, you wish it to become public, become our property.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's a DEP standard. If you have
Okay.
multiple people connected to a sewer line,
Right.
it has to be public. My proposal would be that Mr. Schmidt puts it in to public standard and it be inspected and approved by you guys, so that if you would eventually take it over, it would be to your standard. But if somebody else would tie into it, then it would have to become.
So this question will go to the engineers is, do we have a minimum size for a forced system? Because 1.5 inch sounds undersized in the event that others connect into it. And I'm not quite sure the distance that we have with this elevation change.
Right.
I'm concerned about pipe sizing, so I'd hate to see you go down this path of putting something in. Do we have a minimum size standard for our pipe for force?
I don't believe you do for low pressure sewers. It'd be looking at how many houses could tie in and
Right.
doing that calculation. That's something we could work
We
with.
could
them on.
almost look at it regionally and
Yeah.
say ultimately, if everybody tied in, what diameter would you need? The issue you get into, if you go larger diameter at this point, is you're not gonna get a whole lot of use out of the line, and you're gonna have a lot of sewage sitting in that line at times. So you don't wanna go too large at this point, because it'll turn into sort of an issue at the
Right.
discharge point.
I understand, yeah, but I don't want to get in a situation where if we go down this path, accept it, and then all of a sudden we have a challenge where we have to tell somebody else downstream, hey, we can't do it because the pipe's undersized because we didn't account for this. Then all of a sudden our exposure is that we provided something that's not able to handle other people. And it's kind of hard to figure out. You'd almost have to do a planning modulus to try to figure out how many people could potentially tie into this to size that pipe. So I think there's other activities that may have to happen
Yeah,
before we make some of the decisions.
Yeah, we could look at, ultimately with Lennon Smith here, what would be required and what could get here. But, what we'd want is have everybody individually would have their own individual, grinder.
So do we not have anything on Miller's Run Road which would be downstream from you, right?
We do, but
Between us and Miller's is
You'd have to go
the
under the railroad for that?
railroad track.
that's why that was never originally soared. That's why it stopped, because of the railroad tracks. That's
Well-
why they didn't extend it up onto Clifford Road.
It would
during that
either be
project.
either that or go down Clifford Road and make a right and go down Clifford Road again. There's got to be is there a tunnel, I'm assuming, at Clifford Road where the railroad goes? It crosses under it or over it? It goes over it. So, yeah. Okay.
What's your timeline?
Very due, I mean, obviously, sooner the better,
You're functional, but. Okay. All right.
Obviously, nothing's being done immediately, but, there's gonna be some planning. We would have to go through a planning module, and there would be planning efforts needed prior to even installation. So what we wanted to do tonight is at least to initiate, the conversation or dialogue and say, hey, are you guys okay with us going down this path? And or if you have any other options or plans for public sewer to this area, we're willing to listen.
What from the literature that I read, or the narrative is, it said that either do you have a sand mound now?
No, it's an old
You have an old leach system.
it's a very, yeah.
Okay,
The leach is done, and I cannot,
right.
with the terrain, I can't do anything. They're not letting me do anything. Can't even do a drip system. It's too, the slope's too steep. So I'm in a holding tank type situation right now. And if you look at up and down this area, like, the chance of anybody that's existing to, rebuild their system is going to be very, very difficult on lot system. I mean, you just have now small lots with systems that have probably reached their useful life, which isn't any different from property or whatever.
Well, other than remediation of the leach field, and I mean, excavating it, removing it, and redeveloping it, right? I mean, that would be. It doesn't.
Yeah, there was, yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Doesn't even have a lot of these older systems too, with tiny lots, you just don't have the area to do that.
Right.
Size just isn't there.
Okay, well, I'm in favor of you going down the path of investigating that with Lennon Smith. Anybody else have any qualms about that?
No.
Well, we don't have a need for any kind of motion on this tonight, so.
I
would
can
say-
forward everything over to Larry and then take a look at it, and he can give me comments back, and then I can forward the comments on.
I'll get you one to look at it, and I'll get you some information, we'll go from there.
Yeah, look at
Perfect.
the elevations, links, all that good stuff. Yep,
Right. Thanks, everybody.
Very good, thank
Stay
you.
warm.
will do.
Sorry about that. Engineers report, please.
Okay, the first item on the Lawrence project update. Collection system contract, quiet month, I mean, with the weather, he still has some punch list items remaining, so. Under the wastewater plant contract, so I have the update there of all the work they've completed since the last meeting. The significant update, they have completed startup on a majority of the mechanical equipment. We're making some adjustments in the field. We're working with Mike and the operators. There's a couple things that are getting adjusted. So in terms of process startup, we're looking at that. We'll probably have the plant started up before the next meeting and start pumping from Teodori over to this site. So in terms of the plant running, that's next 30 days is, I think, a good target, but pretty cold. So we'll see if something delays that. So, yep.
Okay.
There is a partial payment, number 19, the amount of $105,069.15. We did attach that. We do recommend approval of that by motion, and that's on your agenda. Change order number 8, that was the EPA contract requirements that we're adding by change order. It's a no-cost change order. We did send that to Mealy. We're waiting for them to sign that and send it back. Then we'll send it to EPA to release the grant funding. And I did see Mike has a meeting with the EPA coming up too, so.
Yeah, there's just a few items on that grant application that he's gonna have to answer for me, because I have no idea where to even start to answer the questions. And I don't wanna submit it where they're not right, and then it bounces back to us, so I'd rather just have the meeting with him, spend an hour, go over the areas that I'm not sure of, and get it off to him, and that ends it. Because some of the questions are, is it ADA compliant, are the tanks compliant, things like that. It's like, that doesn't apply because that's not a public facility that somebody's going to be up on the tanks walking around. So it's one of those things, I gotta make sure that I have everything, so.
We do have the Penvest payment request number 20. That's also on the agenda in the amount of $117,280.96. Traditions of America, I did have a discussion with Mike. So developer, he sent to Mike drawings for phase 6 and 7. So we'll work with Mike on reviewing those. And they plan to start, I guess they indicated to Mike they want to start in summer construction.
Yeah, we were supposed to have a meeting middle of January. That got postponed again. So I will reach back out to them and see when they want to get that started. They did sign the developer agreement. We're just waiting for the escrow to be set up. and the bonds and different things like that, and then have a pre-construction meeting. So, but as far as it goes right now, it's just in a holding pattern.
Okay. How many phases are in that development?
Are these the last
6 and
two?
7 are the
Yeah.
final.
These are the
phases.
final ones,
Those are the
okay.
final.
Yep.
There's 33 in phase 6 and 39 in phase 7. So there's about 72 homes left.
Okay.
Silver Creek, no resubmission, but they did recently advise that they're going to start construction in summer also, and they were going to, I believe, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, they're going to stick with the original plans. They weren't.
They are coming, they requested to be put on the agenda for the February meeting. They do want to talk again about the pipe material in some of the areas, again, that they
If you
had
remember, they
requested.
submitted a substitution request. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So they're going to come to the meeting, so I'll have them on the February 18th
Okay.
agenda.
Okay, on June 9th, Mike and I did meet with KLH and Mount Pleasant Authority board member to discuss the outcome of that feasibility analysis. They were going to have a board meeting and discuss if they want to proceed. I think the first step we would have to some type of agreement between the boards on how we proceed and how the cost would go, and how it's going to work. So right now we're waiting for Mount Pleasant Authority to get back to us. I've not seen an email back since our meeting. So. Yep.
Okay.
FLIR plan and Ridgewood sewer evaluation, Miller's Run area. So in your budget, you do have budgeted to do a CCTV contract in that sewer collection system. First step is we would put together a key map of the area. We do have like all your old record drawings when they built the sewer lines, and we'll put that in the GIS, get that built up, put the contract out to bid, and then when they're out during construction, get all the mapping cleaned up, because they'll find manholes and maybe some were paved over, or some that weren't on the old drawings, or if location shifted. So we'll get all that cleaned up during construction. So, so we'll start in the next month getting the key map set up, and then we can do the bid documents pretty quick for that type of contract. So whenever you want to go to bid. you can do
And
that.
that's Flair and Ridgewood?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Miller's Run lift station emergency bypass outfall repair. So reviewed that with Mike. You have an emergency bypass at that lift station during high flows on Miller's Run. Water does come back into the lift station that way. So then you're pumping and treating creek water. So with this, we looked at it in terms of permitting. You'd have to get a general permit, and the general permit would be to clean up. There's a lot of debris around the outfall, but then add like a duck-bill check valve on the end of it, so water from the stream wouldn't come back in. It would just let water back out. So I reviewed that with Mike, and we'll have to get it surveyed, do design, and get the permit documents prepared for DEP. So we're going to proceed on that with Mike, unless anybody has any questions or on that one.
Does that have to go through the township engineering firm?
No, that'll go through DEP.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll go straight to DEP for a stream general permit modification. We did have, in the past couple of weeks, actually it was last week, Washington County LSA grant application process. We did have the project briefing with the county. And we did present the Cherry Brook lift station improvements to the review committee at their January 15th project briefing session. So now we wait to see if we get awarded. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. So we have a couple of motions pertaining to contract number 21, STP1, rebid Village of Lawrence Sewage Treatment Plant. Do I hear a motion to approve partial payment number 19 in the amount of $105,069.15?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Penvest repayment requisition. Do I hear a motion to approve Penvest payment requisition number 20 in the amount of $117,280.96?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Solicitors report, please.
Thank you. Couple updates real quick tonight. First being on our Rules and Regulations Committee. As everybody's aware, we've been meeting to discuss updates to our rules and regs. We have moved forward with ones pertaining to the Lawrence project thus far. The updated version of our rules and regs was circulated by our office to all the committee members. I've also been tracking on our submission to the township regarding the ordinance updates as well. I have not yet seen a vote on that ordinance taken, but it was my understanding that they have advertised and are planning to move on that ordinance here in the new year. As for the next steps regarding our rules and regulations updates, we're going to be looking at items in the next week or so regarding grease traps, regarding pre-developers agreements and payment of fees associated with that, and laterals under the roadway, how we'd like to handle those. So we're continuing to make good progress there. Second update I have tonight is on our safety manual committee. We've begun that process of review and created a document that contains a very broad interpretation of what could be our safety manual, and our committee now is reviewing that to assess what we do and do not need and where we'd like to go from here regarding finalizing that document. So we're again making good progress on that front. And then no new updates regarding the Lawrence project. As I've said, that continues to move forward as we plan. And those are all my updates. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Business managers report, please.
Hey, your packets this month include the financial reports for November 2024. Any questions? Nope. All right. Before the meeting, I handed out the 2024 statement of financial interest forms. Please fill those out and have them returned to me no later than May 1st of this year. On January 3rd, I made a debt service payment in the amount of $219,886.89 for the 2017 bonds. This was to be paid on or before January 15th. A printout of this transaction was included in your monthly packet. And a few updates. I updated our website with the new Schedule A, with the new service charge for 2025 and the new fees for the dye test. I also updated our dye test application to include these fees. For this month's billing, our billing clerk included an insert informing the customers of the new service charge rate for 2025. I did get the 2025 budget entered into the accounting system. And we also received a maturity notice for CD 00-130-18987. The new rates will be available on January 26th. Once I receive these, I will email the board to see how you would want to proceed. And I also started setting up our utility accounts on ACH to pay the monthly bills.
Great,
Okay, and that's it for me.
thank you. Quick on the budget entry already this year. That's
Yes.
great, awesome. Okay, thank you. Authority managers report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under old business this evening, new NPDES permits, the renewals have all been submitted. We're still waiting for Cherry Brook to come. We did receive the draft for Teodori, but again, as we discussed last month, that plant will be going offline. So by the time we receive the final draft, we'll be submitting a letter to take the plant and retire the permit. Silver Creek Development requested to speak at the February 18th, 2025 meeting to discuss pipe materials that are listed in our rules and regulations, so I have them on the agenda for next month. Gerber Collision was looking to do some modifications at the property at 55 Mayview Road. We did do some letters back and forth, but there has been no change on that. L&S Wastewater contacted the authority about the possibility of acquiring Monaco plan. Additional information that they provided is currently under review, and I will have a final comment for next month's meeting. PennDOT regarding the maintenance bond, there is no change on that. NPDES permit renewal for the Village of Lawrence, Teodori, that's being prepared. We have to have that submitted by March 4th. I'll continue to work with Lennon Smith on that. Pickleball facility at 19 Mayview Road, the developer finally submitted the tap-in application and the check for the tap-in fee, so I will review all of that, and then we can possibly issue the permit. The heater in the garage was fixed at Miller's Run, so that's been repaired, that's taken care of. And the passenger side mirror on the 2023 F-350 has also been repaired.
A quick question
Yes.
on the pickleball facility. Did we determine whether there's going to be food prepared there?
They said there's a kitchen, but they did not say that it's going to be prepared on site.
Okay.
So that's in the application. I have to take a look at the second page to see, but it's 5.5 EDUs is what we're estimating. So that's what they paid for. And then what we will do is once they're connected and it's up and running, we'll watch the usage and then go back and revisit to see if it needs to be adjusted.
Okay, thank you.
Under new business, we had an issue with the number one pump at Miller's Run Pump Station. It tripped the main breaker and it also tripped the breaker for the control panel. So it looks either that we have a VFD that has failed or the pump motor failed. I requested a quote for the VFD in case that's what the issue is. And I have someone scheduled to come out and measure the motor to see if that's what the issue is. Once the problem is determined, I can get a repair scheduled. I attached the quote this evening. The VFD to replace it is $7,885. This VFD is original from when the station was installed in 2008. Item 2, annual Chapter 94 waste load management reports are due by the 28th of March for calendar year 2024. I have started to prepare these reports. And then item 3, the cooling fan for the flow equalization standby blower broke. The fan was made of plastic, it just disintegrated. Unfortunately, parts for that motor have been discontinued, but I was able to find an equivalent fan that was ordered. Cost is $232.70. Final item is I sent everyone in the board packet when I sent it out, a motion to authorize a credit for 1511 Route 980 water leak in the amount of $907.80. At the end of the day, I attached the pictures. It was on their service line prior to the meter. No sewer line around. He did have the proper documentation. That was based on the usage that he was charged for, taking his highest 3 months of usage and subtracting that out, and that's what the amount was that would be refunded. So,
Is he aware of the amount?
yes.
Okay,
I told him that I had to put it on the agenda this evening for approval.
okay.
And that's all I have this evening. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to entertain them.
Okay. Do I hear a motion to authorize approved credit for 1511 Route 980 water leak for $907.80?
I'll make that motion.
A second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
This next item we have a motion for. It was already in the budget. Do we need to have a motion?
It's the motion to authorize, once we have everything together, to have them proceed with the bid documents.
Okay. Well, then I'll make the motion to approve LSSE to proceed with preparing key map and bid documents for 2025 CCTV contract. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Okay, regarding Miller's Run Pump Station, do I hear a motion to approve LSSE to proceed with installing survey, permitting, and design for outfall repair?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Roll call.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Were there any correspondence?
No.
Okay. Committee reports, Mr. Gannon filled us in on many of them. Any other comments on rules and regulations? No? Safety? Okay, budget is complete.
I
Oh,
do have something on safety. Pat had submitted the Word document for the safety manual. I'm working on converting that over to a Google Doc, and I will forward that on to everybody once I get that converted over.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Do we have a motion to approve payment of expenses, transfer of funds for invoices, payroll taxes?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second. Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Barnes,
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers,
Aye.
Mr. Roach,
Aye.
Mrs. Barney,
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Comments from the floor?
Yeah, I was just wondering, has anybody come before the board with the possibility of 123 homes going up on a hill behind us here?
Do you know the name of a plan or what it's,
Yes, yeah, it's
I'm
off
aware
of
of it,
Glass
yeah.
Hill Road.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have approached us to ask, where the nearest tie-in point would be.
I believe back in 2007, 2008, when they came up Route 50, my company did the restoration, so we ended up by the car wash and ended in the parking lot up here by the tennis courts. That's the ending of our lines.
Yes,
So they pretty much would have to bore under the creek, would you say, in the trail, and then go up over the hill to the plant?
that would be one of their options. They would either have to come down Glass Hill Road and find a way to tie in that way, or come down,
All the way down Coombs, a pretty long way.
right. But I think what they're talking about doing is that the bottom corner of the property is going across the trail and possibly, like you said, boring under the creek. I mean, there's no final whatever, they're just looking to see where the nearest sewage is available, if they can do it.
okay. Do we have any estimated time when we'll be hearing from them?
No, I heard from them late November, early December, and they were more or less going back to see if it was going to be approved by the board. I think they had a planning commission meeting that they had to go to. All that they really gave me was rough idea of what they want to do. We'd need more detailed drawings before we could even say yay or nay. I know I showed Larry what they were showing. It's very steep the way they're talking about going. Ultimately, it would be up to them how they would do it, because it would be them to extend the sewer line. It would not be on the authority. We don't extend. I mean, that's the developer if they want. We've also had a couple other inquiries about other parcels of property for development, but that's kind of where we're at.
A little bit what I heard is they're not sure, it's gonna be single family only, that I think that there's the planning and the zoning issues. He's trying to accommodate like a mixed use type scenario. So I'm not quite sure how they're categorizing the improvement.
They're going for rezoning, and their plans are they want to move quick and go before the planning in February, bring it before us in March. But I did see an advertisement for a rezoning of it. Now, if they were trying to go from R1 to MUR, mixed use residential.
Right.
I think they're just planning selling now to go to an R2 residential.
High level, do we have capacity?
We should. At the end of the day, right now, Miller's Run plant is rated at 550,000 gallons a day. I think we're right around average, maybe 115,000 a day. So depending on what it is, I'm not sure what the number of EDUs is. That would be, if you're saying 123, that should, a single family, there should be more than enough capacity.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you, Frank. No need for executive session tonight, so I'll make an motion for adjournment.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned. Record?